All right.
All right.
Thank you, Michelle.
Absolutely.
Hi, everyone. I'm Kat Meschia, like Michelle mentioned. My role kind of covers a huge gamut of things. Today, I'm really excited to be talking to this group. Michelle does a fabulous job of making a wide range of topics is covered. So, and I am really excited to talk about interviews because they are a topic near and dear to my heart. So I started sharing my screen, just quick thumbs up or head nods if you're just seeing my screen, not seeing notes or anything. Awesome, rehearsal is worth it. So welcome to Interview Best Practices. As you can read from the title, that we will be going over some of the common mistakes or different watchouts for when you are conducting your own interview practices. This is meant to be a practical guide, so we will be focusing a lot more on the tactical aspects and less on strategy. So if you have questions along the way, please feel free, jump in, ask questions, or if you're someone who likes to take notes and ask questions at the end. I did build in time for Q&A. So as we jump into the presentation, I like to always define my terms first. We're all operating under the same knowledge base. So I like to start with answering the questions, what are unstructured and semi-structured interviews? And answering, when should you use them? Unstructured and semi-structured interviews are a type of qualitative research methodology that are really designed to collect non-numerical data to gain insights. Maybe these terms are familiar, maybe they're not, but basically qualitative methodologies rely on data collection to answer the question of why. This is slightly contrasted to quantitative data, which is more the metric piece. Qualitative data collects information to describe a topic more than measure it. This type of research measures opinions, views, and attributes versus hard numbers that you would typically see in a graph chart. This is really important that when you are creating a research plan is to look at both sides. So a lot of times researchers are more versed in one or the other, but to create a really robust research plan, you need to know what is happening, but also understand why it's happening. Now, what makes an interview structured or semi-structured? As you can probably infer, unstructured and semi-structured refer to how strict your interview script is. For example, if you're in a completely unstructured interview, you'll go in with your general learning goal, but without a specific question set. For a semi-structured interview, you would have a discussion guide with prepared questions, but there's some allowance for natural divergence and exploration throughout the interview. These are different from a structured interview, which is very strict. Sometimes a structured interview might look like a survey at the end of a conference or things like that, where you're not digging into people's answers for further exploration. Semi-structured and unstructured interviews provide rich insights that a structured interview does not allow you to explore. These tips that I'm going to cover today will help both of these types of interview methodologies. So when should you use these? I'm going to cheat a little bit and tell you, spoiler alert, at every stage of the project. You might be thinking, okay, that's great, qualitative research, that sounds like something, if I'm trying to answer why, it would be at the end, after something's already built. But I'd say at the beginning of a project, qualitative research is really, really great before your concept has even been defined. When you are interviewing people, you get a better understanding of your potential users and their wants and needs. You can save a lot of time and resources before building something that when you go to market, you realize, oh shoot, no one actually wants this. No one wants this, and then for a sustainable business, no one wants to pay for this. The information you collect during an interview in the early stage of a project will help inform your hypotheses and eventually your ideas. Now, during a project, these kinds of interviews are really great for getting qualitative feedback. This is the time where you can use it to bolster quantitative data. So there are things like usability tests or Google Analytics or other types of methodologies where you can start seeing or assigning numbers to interactions. Cool, you've got numbers, excellent, we all love that. These structured and semi-structured interviews will do a good job of rounding out that story. So you have the hard numbers, but where do you go from that? The numbers themselves don't necessarily tell you why something is not working. And then of course, at the end, when the product or service is live, these kinds of interviews will help you get more insights after a usability test. So that kind of covers the gamut of unstructured and semi-structured interviews and when you should use them. I'm going to pause real fast to see if there are any hands. All right, don't see hands, so I'm going to take that as a sign to keep going. So now we all understand what semi-structured and unstructured interviews are, why they're important, why we should absolutely be utilizing these at every stage of our project. Let's get into planning. This planning checklist is going to be very, very high level, and it's really aimed at making your process more consistent. When you have a consistent process, it can help prevent bias and create more points of parity across your interviews. I'll use an example of you're having a ton of research sprints, and every time you enter a new research sprint, you don't really have a checklist. So every time you jump into a research sprint, your process might look too different that you're not really sure if the data that you're collecting can be comparable. And that's really what points of parity mean. It means that you are ensuring that the important pieces to your research are enough that you can confidently assess if a pattern is occurring. That's really what we're looking for. We're looking for patterns. So here is what I personally use as a research planning checklist with a couple of tips thrown in. This is not all inclusive. These are just the high level things that I personally find really important. I like to break it up in terms of different stages of the project, and we'll start with the before. Before you do anything, you need to set a clear goal. Too many times, junior researchers will jump into an interview because they think that's what they need to do, but they don't truly understand why they're doing it or what they're trying to answer. Without that clear goal, stakeholders might not understand what you're doing or why you're doing it, and that'll come back later and later every single time when you feel like you keep running into the same questions and trying to defend what you're doing. Your goal should be very transparent and visible, and it should answer the two basic questions of why are you doing this research and what will you do with the findings? A lot of times people answer one or the other, but rarely are both answered in a way that the team can get alignment before the start. This goal is really important because it can help determine your methodology. With your methodology, there are a couple of different ways to do it. There's honestly a ton of different methodology matrices that can help you determine what one to pick, whether you're trying to answer questions about your user or product, understanding what versus why, different time variances and budgets, et cetera, et cetera. I think someone might have done a presentation with it in this group. If not, hey, great future topic. But without that goal, you're not going to understand why a methodology is the right one for you. Once you have your methodology, it's time to decide who to recruit. You can start with your proto-personas and try to find a representative sample of your target audience. Notice that I use the term proto-persona here. And this is something that is a tiny hill I'm willing to stick my foot in. It's not a hill I'm willing to die on, but it's definitely one I'll stick a tiny cocktail flag in. For a proto-persona, I think it's important to use this phrase because too often a lot of researchers and stakeholders and teams get caught up that a persona is the perfect, infallible representation of a user, which it might be. But until you actually do the research to validate it, it's a hypothesis. So that's why I like to split my terms out and say proto-persona versus persona. That helps kind of break that mental model that a lot of teams have already been accustomed to. Okay, I see a hand. Can't see the name.
Hi there. Hi. Thank you so much for explaining that. That's actually a really great concept. Just a quick question, sorry to interrupt. for proto-persona, would you use that terminology then only in the research phase, or when would you then switch to using the actual term of persona? Or do you personally not use persona in your, your process of developing, like developing a UX design?
I would start using the term persona once I feel like there's enough research that we can accurately predict behavior. What I mean by that is we have done enough research that we understand that this group of people's pains and what they're trying to do enough that we're like, cool, this group, when we actually see them in a real environment, and your metric might vary, but for success for us might be like 80% of this population when in this situation will respond this way. That's when I would call that a persona. Until the research has actually happened and it's just a guess what a behavior is doing, or we don't have the metrics tied to it. Again, why you need qual and quant, I would stick to proto-persona.
Great, thank you.
Yeah, that's a great question. So with your proto-personas all picked out, this is the time to create your discussion guide. Discussion guide is literally just your list of questions that is your safety blanket during an interview. These are learning topics, maybe they are specific questions, but this is the part where you can keep referring to so that when you're doing your interview and allowing for this deeper explorations, you're still making sure that you're covering the topics that will achieve your project goals. The last one that I feel like a lot of people tend to forget is preparing the team in the room. What that might look like for the team side is pep talks, making sure the energy is good. These things are draining. Make sure you have water, you have energy, and you've talked to your team about the different roles they have. If you're a researcher team of one, self-care, super important. If you have multiple people, explaining what your expectations of them are. So whether that's note taker, facilitator, I've had teams where someone is literally just notating facial expressions while another person is notating the actual words someone is saying. And then this one for preparing the room might not be as applicable in the world of Zoom, but if you are trying to prepare an interview, it can be more helpful to create an environment most similar to the situation you're trying to learn about. i.e., if you are learning about behavior in a coffee shop, either doing the interview in a coffee shop or setting up your space to feel like it, to make people feel more comfortable. Sorry, I'm just reading the chat.
You're good. I was just making comments about it. It definitely, like, making those assignments definitely helps keep people from tuning out.
Absolutely. So if anyone isn't reading the chat, Michelle mentions that getting people involved increases the participation. On a similar note, I would definitely say involve your stakeholders in every step of the process here. If your stakeholders are only showing up at project kickoff and readout, they are not bought in. This is going to honestly be a personal struggle for you as a researcher trying to convince them, or at worst, they don't truly understand the data that you're presenting. And then that's another way for the research to just quickly die on the vine. And no one wants that. No one wants to feel like, hey, all this effort that we're putting in is just going to end up in a PowerPoint deck on Google Drive lost forever. That's not our goal. Not our goal. All right. Okay. So we've done all the prep work. You've actually gotten to the room and you have a real person sitting in front of you. A lot of people forget this part, but start recording. This will come up later again, but it's such a good way of holding your team accountable to actually hearing what you think you're hearing. As researchers, a lot of times we recognize we all bring in our own bias, but sometimes when we're hearing things and trying to pay attention and we're trying to just coordinate a lot of things in the moment, what we thought we heard might not be what they actually said. These recordings are a way of keeping that bias down and holding ourselves accountable. But also don't forget to ask to record. A lot of times in whatever platform you're using, it's in the terms and conditions, but better safe than sorry. During the interview as well, we suggest leading with warm-up questions. Michelle does a great job of this. They're very easy questions, asking someone about their job, what they do, things like that. These are questions that make a participant feel more comfortable with the idea that there are no right or wrong answers. A lot of times, if you're in an unfamiliar room with someone who is asking you deeply personal questions, like if you went up to a bar and you just started asking someone like, hey, tell me all about your relationship with your father. You're like, what the hell? Please back up. Don't talk to me. But if you're like, hey, what are you doing? It's like natural relationship progression. That was probably a weird one. I couldn't think of a product example on the fly. I am so sorry. Otherwise, during the interviews, a couple things to watch out for is sticking to your defined interview method. And this is why we set a goal and pick a methodology in the beginning. If you've decided that you're going to go semi-structured, make sure that you're still covering the questions that you determined were important enough to define. So if you pick semi-structured, don't completely go off script and turn it into an unstructured interview. Similarly, if you've decided to do a structured interview, which isn't really what we're talking about here, but if you decide to go for a structured interview and you're like, oh, I want to dig into that more, well, maybe it's time to reassess what your project goals are and pick a new methodology. This is a way of making sure that your data can be comparable. We'll come back to this last point because honestly, a large part of this presentation are the common interview missteps, but you'll get more walkthrough for those. Sweet. You finished your interview, participant is happy, you promised them their compensation, they're walking out the door, exiting the Zoom call, and is after the interview. This is the time to review your findings and synthesize with the team. A lot of times, there's a couple of different thoughts on this, on whether you want time, longer time in between interview sessions so you can process it. Some people like doing it immediately after. It really depends on you and your team. I personally like hearing gut reactions immediately after an interview, just to get quick gut checks, and then maybe doing a more in-depth synthesis later. So this is the time to hear from your team what they were seeing. Like as an interviewer, you might not be focusing on the facial expressions, or you didn't catch a tone, or your team might have been like, oh, I wish you dug into this aspect more. And you're like, cool. Now I know if I have another interview right after this to do that so I don't make the same mistake. And then lastly, as a personal growth opportunity, see if your team has interview notes for you. The common interview missteps that I'll be reviewing are very, very hard to catch yourself as you're doing them. So use your team. They probably will be like, yeah, got you. They're already observing you. It's not going to be a ton of extra lift on their part, and it builds a great culture of feedback. So let's get into those interview tips. These interview tips are pulling inspiration from a couple of different leaders within the UXR space. I personally really like Laura Klein and Slava, I'm going to butcher her last name, Shestopolov. So these are different influences, and this is a rubric that I personally use when I'm watching recordings of myself or when I'm coaching other people. So pick and choose which makes sense for you, but generally these are a good starting point. The first common misstep is selling your idea. So what does it look like? And all these tips will follow the same format. We'll go over what it looks like and then how to address it. So what it looks like is telling participants how your product or service will solve their problem. You're putting your or your team's enthusiasm for the product over your learning objectives. Well, all of a sudden you've become Billy Mays. We're just like, hey, this is so great. If you do this, this will be amazing, blah, 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 blah. And that enthusiasm can actually influence how your participants respond. So instead, try phrasing your questions to be neutral, action-oriented statements. Instead of saying, this app is going to solve everything, say, tell me about your experience with the sign-up process. Another way of doing this is distancing yourself from the product. You can use phrases like, in the beginning, this is great in the introduction period. like telling them that your goal is to hear their honest feedback. And then slight language changes, instead of saying our app, say this app. Subconsciously, when we hear that someone has ownership over something, it makes us feel more guarded about giving our honest thoughts. Like, you're not going to tell someone their baby is ugly. But if you're like, what do you think of this baby? They're like, not the cutest one I've ever seen. There's going to be a difference there in your responses. And the last thing you can try is avoiding emotional qualifiers. So when you start adding adjectives into your questions, that's a really good indicator to step back and evaluate what that is implying to your participant. So a lot of times people say like how amazing their app is. I've tried to go ridiculous and say, we want your feedback on this life-changing app, things like that. Just remove any kind of emotional qualifiers in your questions. The second one is asking yes/no questions. I'll preface this by saying not all yes/no questions are wrong. They definitely serve a purpose if you're using them as a jumping off point. But if all of your answers from your interviews are starting to look binary and there's not a lot of room for deeper exploration or follow-ups, you're missing the larger story. This is also when your qualitative research starts becoming quantitative, that is also a good indication. If you can say 5 out of 10 participants said they would like this versus why they would like this, okay, maybe not those yes/no questions. A time people do this a lot is, do you use this XYZ? Instead of yes or no, a really, really simple way of changing that is, when do you use this? That will also give you deeper insights. If someone just says, yes, they use it, like, all right, cool, next question. But you say when, they could say, oh, in the morning on my way to school, or after work, when I'm done putting the kids down. That kind of qualitative data is really the strength of these interviews, and that's why you want to stay away from yes/no questions. Our third one is leading the participant. I think we've all heard about leading the witness, leading questions, things like that. And this is probably the hardest one for people to change. So let's look at what it actually looks like in practice. If you're leading the participant, you might be giving the participants verbal cues as to what the right answer is. This could be either in your word choices or your tone of voice. Like, oh, would you really do that? You have to be really careful about measuring your tone. Tone inflection, great for presentations. Tone inflections for interviews, not so much. If you are paraphrasing responses back to participants with additional emotions, that is also leading them. We'll get into an example of what that means, but it's similar to, actually, I'll just jump to it. If someone is saying, like their verbatim response was, this app makes me feel like a child. And you're like, all right, I hear you saying that you don't like this screen because it makes you feel inept and talked down to. Is that correct? Whoa, that is not what they said. When they said the screen makes them feel like a child, they could have meant anything. They could have meant it makes them feel youthful or playful or innocent. And then you paraphrasing emotions with qualifiers within that has completely changed the context that they're saying. And now they're thinking, oh, should I be feeling that way about this screen? So that's really important to keep your emotions out of the paraphrasing. The last point is all or most of your participants are answering the questions in the same way. This is usually a good indicator that you're leading participants, or honestly, everyone has become so predictable that like we don't need to do any more qualitative research ever again in our lives. It's probably not true. It's probably the former. So if you notice that as a pattern in your results, that could be a time to watch your recordings and see if you are leading someone. So this is for actual ways to get around this, is when you're writing questions, it's really easy to identify those emotional indicators. This is one that I see all the time, but a lot of people put their hypothesis in their questions by saying, how would this improve your financial habits? That's making the assumption that this app is going to help them versus how could this affect your financial habits? So you're not telling them that this is helping them. You're not making the assumption that it's solving their problem. And then, like I mentioned before, keep your clarification paraphrasing as close as possible to the original statement. This will help keep you from biasing the participant, and it allows you to get clarity for note takers as well. I think we're on number 4. So this next one is making the participant imagine. What it looks like is relying on verbal descriptions for context and scene setting. It's making assumptions about what the participant is imagining. For example, if I ask you to think of a chair, the way I mean chair and the chair that popped into your head might be completely different. I might be thinking an office chair. You might be thinking a beanbag. How will we know? I don't know. But I'm relying on your imagination, and without really understanding what that means to you, leaves too much for interpretation for us to actually understand what the participant is trying to say. It can also look like about asking about theoreticals instead of reality. So if you're asking about flying cars or a situation that doesn't apply to someone, they're not going to have a lot of great insight for you. You're not asking them to be a creative brainstormer with you. You're asking about their real lived experiences. Another way this shows up is asking about non-near past. I think it's very common that people's memory gets less and less reliable the farther you are from a situation. So if you're asking someone about their yearly routine, that data is not going to be as accurate. And then the last point is you are offering up ad hoc solutions. So if you have a set of screens that is already looking for insights on a specific goal, and all of a sudden you're like, but what if you would like this feature? One, that does nothing for your points of parity unless you're going to edit your screens to make sure that you're asking that for every other person. It's a rabbit hole that's really not worth going down. And 2, that solution, more likely than not, the participant's going to be like, yeah, I love it. Why would they not love it? You're offering them up something, but they didn't have to spend time imagining what the problem was and creating a solution. That doesn't have any real indicators of if they would use it in their real lives. So ways to circumvent this is to show them something, anything. This can be napkin sketches. If you have a designer on your team, it could be interactive prototypes, just anything that you guys can use as a shared frame of reference, even if they have questions about what they're looking at. For example, instead of having someone imagine a scenario, you can walk them through the scenario. We had a project where it dealt with home repairs. So in the initial interviews of exploration, we couldn't go into people's homes, but the team had created like fake washing machines and fake dryers, and they asked participants to walk them through their laundry routines. Instead of just being like, hey, think back to the last time you did laundry. It was a little bit more contextual, and we could ask questions as it was actually happening.
I have one quick thought, Kat, if I may, just about the adding the visual. I've recently learned about aphantasia. I don't know if everybody's familiar with this, but part of the population is just unable to produce a mental image in their mind. So when we're asking people to imagine things, there are some people that literally just can't quite, they can't visualize something in their brain. There's literally just not something that they can do. For me, I'm a very visual person. I do a lot of imagining in my own head. And so when I learned that, it was very surprising. So I wanted to just share that as like another reason not to ask your participants to try and imagine something themselves, because you don't know what their capabilities are. They may not be comfortable doing it. There's all kinds of reasons not to rely on someone else's imagination for something when you can otherwise provide something concrete for them to bounce feedback off of.
Yeah, absolutely. I immediately think about my husband when I want to do creative brainstorming sessions, and he's like, I have no idea what you're talking about. Like, okay, here, I'll draw it. But I think that's great. That's another way of checking our own biases as researchers. So another common pitfall is helping the participant. This one feels very innocuous. A lot of times we can brush it off as like, oh, it didn't really do anything. But as researchers, we have to understand that everything we do has to be intentional. Otherwise, it does affect the data that we collect. So helping the participant can look like telling participants what they're looking at. A lot of times on projects, we have internal names for screens. Like this is the play and learn screen. All right, well, that definitely means something to you. But now if you're telling the participant what that screen is named without letting them explain what they're seeing, you've already influenced what they think they should be seeing. If you jump in to show participants what they should be doing, you see they're taking their time, not really sure where to go. And you're like, oh, just click to the next thing. Well, now you've created some pressure on them. Now they might feel like, oh, I should have been doing this sooner. And now they're in a state of panic for the rest of the interview. Or they get pissed. They're like, I'm not going to listen to what they're going to say, whatever. Essentially, you jumping in and influencing how they're interacting with the product is a way of helping the participant. This last one is one of those pieces where it's like, but this isn't a negative thing, but it can have interesting implications. And that's offering encouragement. You say, don't worry, take your time. Similarly to showing participants where they should go. Now they have an understanding. They might not have thought that they were taking a long time. It might have felt like a long time to you as a researcher because you know what they should be doing. But to them, it could be like, all right, I'm just exploring. And now they feel like, oh, I should have been faster. These try insteads are a little tongue in cheek, sitting on your hands, biting your tongue, doing nothing. A more practical answer is if a participant asks you, sometimes this happens, where they're like, how do I do this? What am I looking at? Just respond back with a question. How might you do that? What do you think you're looking at? How might you use this? It's a lot more useful so you can get their thought process instead of coloring their answers. Question? No question. Okay. The next one is failing to follow up. So huge. Oh, there's a question. Okay.
Hey, yeah, I had a question. I've had some interviews where the participant will like, if they do something wrong, they'll like say, oh, I should have done that right, or I shouldn't have been so stupid, or they'll like, because they think they messed up. So I mean, is it okay saying like encouraging things if they're like belittling themselves because they think they are doing something wrong, or should you just try to still be more neutral and not say much? Like,
yeah, I honestly lean on neutral. It's hard as humans, and I'm sure as researchers and designers in the space, we got into this to help people. So it's hard to hear when someone is self-deprecating. But that's the side we need to lean into. So if someone's like, oh, I shouldn't have done that, you can ask them, like, why do you say that? Why do you think you shouldn't have done that? So you can get them to explain their thinking more, because if they're still expressing a negative thought, whether it's about themselves in their interaction, that's still worth exploring. And it's a way of kind of interrupting that necessarily downhill spiral, which is maybe a poor way of saying it. But there's a ways of doing it that is still neutral, that can further your research, that doesn't quite lose the humanity aspect either.
thanks.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. All right. So failing to follow up is probably the biggest error that we can make as researchers during this type of interviews, because the entire value of these is the follow-up. So if you are moving from question to question without clarification or pushing for details, if you find that end of your research sprints, you have general sentiments, but you don't really understand where those sentiments are coming from, or you're missing numbers, those could be signs that you need to be leaning in more. So for example, if a participant is sharing their reaction, ask what made them react that way. So if someone's like, oh, that was frustrating. Oh, what was frustrating about it? Oh, this was really fun. Even positive things like, oh, I really liked that. A lot of times for people usually take that as a check mark and they're like, sweet, people love our product, awesome. But dig into it. Like, why did they like it? Was it the branding? Was it the imagery? Was it the wording? Was it a combination? The whole point is to understand what that why is. When you're digging into the why, make sure you confirm the why after you feel like you've reached the bottom of your whys. This is a way of double checking, making sure that you're understanding what's happening and not leaving assumptions on the table. Then a participant can either confirm or be like, no, and you can go deeper. Missing numbers piece refers to these generalizations people make about timeframes. And they say, oh, I always use this, or I would never use this, or sometimes I check this. Those are really vague and mean very different things to different people. So even though this isn't quantitative, this is an area where we can push more. So if someone does use one of these ambiguous framings, you're like, oh, what does sometimes mean to you? You might find sometimes to them means daily. And you're like, oh, glad I dug into that, because I would have assumed sometimes meant 3 times a month. Well, that's a huge difference. I think this is the last of these tips, but the last one is Frankensteining your questions together. Very appropriate for Halloween, but this can be one of 2 things. This can be presenting multiple questions as a package that cover different topics, or you're breaking apart an experience into separate questions instead of focusing on the total experience. So the first one about presenting multiple questions as a package, this is one that I know I need to personally work on in conversations, but it's kind of that word vomit of like, what do you do? When do you do it? Blah, 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 blah. And you're packaging all these questions without giving room for a participant to actually answer. And you usually can identify this if you're covering multiple thoughts. So try to be precise with your questions and be intentional with your breaks in between them. Second part about, that's kind of the flip side of breaking apart the experience into too many little parts, is you can try asking broad questions or using storytelling statements. So instead of, why do you use mail service? How do you use it? When do you use it? Which are picking apart the details of someone's experience with the meal service app, you can be more broad and say, tell me about your last experience with the meal prep service. When you ask why, how, when, you're going to get very specific answers, and you might lose out some of the more storytelling aspects of their entire experience. So those are all the kind of common pitfalls. That's what I use as my rubric when I'm trying to better my research practice and making sure that I'm creating those points of parity and checking my own bias. I have a couple of just bonus tips, like helpful phrases and miscellaneous tips as well. I think the more you practice these phrases, they'll come more naturally during the actual interview process. So if you find yourself jumping in with solutions or making assumptions, you can just practice these so that in the time you can be like, cool, tell me more about that. That is probably the best phrase you can use. Just tell me more about that. I heard blah, blah, blah. Is that what you said? Practice, practice, practice. It will make it easier. Besides the phrases, I would encourage everyone to lean into the silence. Give participants a chance to think before you jump in. In a natural conversation, people tend to try to fill the silence. But as researchers, we just kind of have to get comfortable with that awkward pocket and sit. If we try to jump in a natural conversation, we're trying to predict what someone's going to say, which is great in that context. But if we don't allow participants to fully finish their thoughts, it can change our data. Second one is look for patterns instead of absolutes. A lot of people love using qualitative interviews to get those sound bites, and they're great. They really go a long way, especially when you're doing stakeholder presentations and selling the overall findings. As some people make the mistake of taking something that one person said and using it as an absolute. What you want to do instead is throughout all these interviews is look for patterns so that they can inform future hypotheses or further learnings. Their point is don't assume shared definitions. Similarly to how I did in the beginning, I didn't want to assume that we all knew about the different types of interviews, even though this is a UX meetup, and that might have been a safe assumption. But if I didn't define those interviews and I kept using those phrases over and over throughout this presentation, that probably would have been really frustrating, and maybe some of the pieces wouldn't have connected. I think another great thing about these in-person, I'll say in-person in quotes for Zoom interviews, is that you can see body language. So I mentioned how a team before had someone purely observing body language. That can be a good indicator of how someone really felt. And the last one, like everything, is just record yourself. These rubrics will only help you grow if you're actually being diligent to your practice and watching yourself, grading yourself, because without that, it's easy to go into our natural patterns. So those are my last little tips on how to avoid common interview pitfalls. I'll leave it open for any general questions. Yeah, man, I wish when I was presenting, I could actually see people's names when I scroll over them.
Hi, Kat, it's Lisette. Thank you so much for your presentation and for your time and sharing your experience in user research. I just had two questions. I don't know, hopefully they're not very lengthy in responding, but the first is, how do you find participants for your research? Maybe every company maybe varies in its access to certain groups of people or whatnot. I don't know if there are certain sites that you find them on. And my second question is related to actually noting body behaviors and body language in your research process, which is, I mean, I may interpret someone is, confused or distressed or upset a certain way, and maybe another person may as well. And would you then sort of go over sort of the basic standardized ways of viewing body behaviors with your team before going into these interviews? Or like, how do you address that, I guess? So yeah, thank you.
Yeah, I'll start with the first question. I'll say we use a couple of different platforms. Michelle can speak to the platforms that she uses. We kind of have different researchers throughout the company that have their own preferences. So sometimes it's using a third-party platform if we feel like the persona pool is large enough to pull from to use a third party. Sometimes we work with clients where their clients are so specific that we do need to work with an existing group, and then we'll work with them to figure that out. I would say, honestly, Michelle, we could invite Matthew. Matthew is really great at recruiting and has a lot of great tips on recruiting. So maybe that could be a future talk, but I'll let Michelle talk about the platform she uses.
Yeah, Matthew would be great for a recruiting talk for sure. Yeah, so for doing IDIs, there's a number of online platforms where you can kind of automate recruiting. Userlytics, for example, you can do live interviews with people, and you can use their pool of participants, and you can just recruit from that. And it's kind of a whoever replies first. But it's typically a very generic demographic, men between the ages of 18 and 25 with this income level, living in this country, that kind of thing. There's also userinterviews.com, which is much cheaper and allows greater flexibility for recruiting. So like if you wanted to just do a Zoom call, for example, or even a phone call itself, which I wouldn't recommend, but let's say you do a Zoom call, you could organize that through there. And in terms of cost, it's very low. There's other ones, I can't quite remember. I think User Focus maybe is one of them. But there's a number of recruiting platforms out there specifically for this that are fairly lightweight and fairly inexpensive. If you have a very niche demographic that you need to reach, so for example, I worked on a financial product and we needed to target people at a certain age who had a certain amount of debt, who had a certain level of income, and we needed representative samples from, various income levels of various, job types and this kind of thing. It was a very, very in-depth recruiting with a very long screener. I'm talking about like 30 question screener. In that case, we ended up going to field work is one of the companies that will do recruiting, and they posted their social and they have their own user base that they pull from, and then people that are interested, they have to go through the screener, that kind of thing. There's a ton of those companies around. I think maybe a little bit less so since the pandemic started because it kind of hit them hard. Most of those places have in-person testing rooms that you can rent space from. But they certainly during the pandemic, they've been accommodating and allow you to interact with participants however you like. But the act of recruiting is an art form in and of itself, which is why Kat mentioned Matthew talking, because most of these platforms, you don't really touch them very much. You don't really touch the people. You kind of look at their demographics, and the first time you talk to them is, when you're starting the IDI. And Matthew has a really great process of like doing the screener with them and really getting them involved in the process. And he has a pretty much 100% return rate on people coming to the IDI.
It is 100% right now.
Yeah. So he's I don't know what voodoo he's got, but it's good. But yeah, if you do a search, there's, like I said, there's a ton of really inexpensive tools for recruiting for this purpose. I mean, that's the nice thing about our industry is it's booming with more and more online tools. Things like usertesting.com 10 years ago, that was the only thing out there. And now, there's a million of them. So.
Another great just personal growth tip is whatever platform you choose, like sign up as a tester so you can see and experience what it looks like from that side.
Definitely. And you can see how little people are paid too.
Yeah, that too.
I think Usability Hub, I signed up for as a participant, and you get paid like 10 cents per test. And each test is like 5 minutes. It's like,
yeah,
not worth the time. So you can actually see in the results sometimes people just like Christmas treeing it in,
Wow.
The other recruiting, yeah. And just lastly, as Kat mentioned, if you have a client that has a user base already, usually you can leverage their marketing department and have them send out a recruiting email, basically. And that might just be like a link to a survey, get a little bit of screener information, inquire, have a last question. If you're interested in participating in our study, we'd love to talk to you, that kind of thing. I will caveat, make sure that the entire company knows that you're doing this, because I ran one of those recently and had somebody sign up for time and then thought it was a scam because no one at the company knew what was going on. And he got on the call, he's like, I'm not giving you my social security number. It's okay, I'm not going to ask for that. It's a lighting company. I don't need to know that. So just making sure that, you communicate that across all branches of the company.
Then answering your second question about body language, this is one where I think it pays to have multiple people. Fortunately, it does get harder if you're a team of one. But I'd say having more than one person keeping an eye on it so that they can verify or contrast what they were seeing is important. I think this is an important part to note about cultural differences too. A common one is head movements. Certain head movements mean confirmation versus not. And either pulling someone who is familiar with cultural body language can be great. If you don't have that, the next best thing is having multiple people giving your read on it. But we don't do any kind of like pre-body language briefing. Maybe we should. That would be interesting.
Thank you so much.
Mhm. Any other questions? Feedback, things you want to learn more about? There's more presentations for, I don't know, the rest for 2022.
Would you happen to have a listserv for future events or any relatable, I guess, event like this or in the future that I could sign up for?
Michelle runs the Meetup page, which I think I have the link up, but I can just quickly share. Michelle, is the Facebook group still pretty updated?
It's not, I keep it updated, but it's really not very active. I'll drop into the chat the link to the Meetup group, which, obviously we're continuing to meet. And as I mentioned, we'll be determining kind of how we want to take this group, if we want to focus more on research or design, or if we need to split it, et cetera. So definitely keep an eye out for that. But yeah, and we continue having these every month, with the exception of January, just because of the early New Year, people coming back from holidays. So yeah, you can expect next month, hopefully we'll be talking to Pavi Logiswaran, who is a product designer at Shopify and previously at Capital One. So we'll be talking a little bit more design next month, but well, if anybody would like to talk, present, we'll be happy to have you. So just reach out to me, let me know. All right, if there's no other questions, I'll go ahead and wrap up. Thank you guys all for coming again, and have a safe holidays, and we will see you guys next month. Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.